But hey, we got Will's calling. Will's a theist from maybe Puerto Rico. Wants to talk to you about your God test. So, Will, congratulations. Welcome. You're on with Paul.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Will.
Hey, Paulogia. Hey, do you remember a
Hi.
long time ago? I forget how long ago it was. You put something on X that you had a phrase in your mind and you challenged theists to pray to God and ask what it was.
Yes, I will admit though that I don't actually recall what the phrase was. Hold on.
Okay.
Are you going to claim that? Are you going to claim that you knew what the phrase was at the time when I tweeted that?
No, I was just curious because I never heard what it was.
As I recall, it was something ridiculous, something along the lines of my dog jumps on the mattress, or like something in the category of like just something that I had observed, something along
Okay.
those lines. But that it wasn't that, but it was something like that.
Gotcha. I did want to share something with both of you. Cool. It took me 40 years to finally have an answer for divine hiddenness.
Oh, great.
Okay.
As a theist, I actually struggled with that. But and I know a lot of atheists struggle with that as well. And
It's
here's
my
what I
A
think
number.
the
I
answer is.
think it's probably the strongest argument against most God propositions. So if you've got a solution to the problem of divine hiddenness, that would be immensely helpful.
And to clarify,
Okay,
Will,
great.
are you a theist? You're a theist now, right? You just said you were flip-flopping between atheist and theist. You're currently a theist still, right?
Yes, I have always essentially been a theist.
Okay, very good, very good. I just wanted to make sure we were clear. So please proceed. I would love to hear how divine hiddenness doesn't work.
Yeah, what I realized was that when you kind of like shove truth in people's faces, the vast majority of the time they have a very negative reaction to it. They don't just say, "Oh, wow, thank you so much for showing this to me. I was wrong. I now know the truth."
Yeah,
And
this
so
is not
God
this is
has,
not this is not only not new, it's not a solution to the problem of divine hiddenness. Basically, you're claiming that God knows that we would not react poorly and so then continues to hide.
no, what I'm saying
Okay.
is that God as a relational God is more interested in having people make the choice to believe in him rather
But
than making
but
it
belief
to
but
where
belief
they
isn't
have
a
to.
choice. Belief isn't a choice. You're either convinced or you're not.
I
Well,
think belief is a choice.
You're wrong.
yeah, no, it's not.
Well, let me give you an example, and maybe we can see where we're missing each other here. One of the
Okay, we're
places
missing
I've
each
seen
other
this.
on the definition of belief. Belief is the state of being convinced that something is true, right?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so where I've seen this firsthand is I've done a lot of anti-abortion work, including standing outside of abortion facilities and holding pictures.
You're lucky I
And
let
when
you
I show,
continue talking.
okay, when I show people a picture of either an aborted baby or an unborn baby, almost all the time they get upset and angry with me.
Yes.
And all I'm doing
Do you know
is showing
why?
them something free. Why?
No, because you're not. See, that you have decided that because you are opposed to abortion, that you can use sensationalized images in order to make an emotional appeal to people. That's not you presenting the truth and them refusing to believe it. There's nobody who you could show a fetus to who has any understanding of science who would deny that that is a fetus and a human fetus, etc. That's not the fact that you're showing. What you're trying to do is infer from a picture or something else that something is wrong. That is a fallacious appeal to emotion. Whether or not some people react negatively to being presented with facts about the truth is independent of whether or not other people will accept the truth. God could present evidence for his existence, and I would still have the opportunity to choose what to do about that. I would absolutely believe my belief that God exists is not a choice, but whether or not I choose to worship or follow that God is a choice. That's not belief. That is adherence. Just like I believe that Donald Trump is president, I do not choose to endorse or support him.
Well, what we should have done up front is what is your definition of divine hiddenness? Because I suspect it sounds like that perhaps what I think is divine hiddenness is not the same as what you think it is. So please describe divine hiddenness as you understand it.
Yeah, that could very well be the case that we don't have the same definition, but I look at divine hiddenness as why it's not, just blatantly obvious to everyone that God exists.
No, that's not certainly that's not the version of divine hiddenness that affects me and is the reason why I don't believe. For me, divine hiddenness is something along the lines of, if there is a God who wants to have a relationship with me, and that's a huge if, right? Not everyone thinks God cares. If there's a God who wants to have a relationship with me, he is able to at least give me the first step of acknowledging his existence before I can make an informed choice about whether I want to have that my part of the relationship.
Yeah, it's kind of like being told, hey, I've got this friend and they think you're hot and want to go out with you. And then you say, cool, let me meet them. And then the answer is no.
Yeah, I think that so there's a big assumption I'm going to make right now that I know you guys disagree with, but just bear with me. I do believe in the historical record presented in the Bible. And so what I see
All
throughout
of
that
it?
story,
All of it? Like you believe the entire earth was covered with water and that it was created in 6 literal days or not?
yeah, I was just about to mention
So
that,
you're
yeah.
saying that in addition to being opposed to freedom, you're also opposed to science. Okay.
I wouldn't say that, but maybe.
You did. If you
So,
think
okay,
that the
well,
earth was literally created in 6 days and the entire thing was flooded, you are in opposition to science. If you think that the diversity of species on the planet is explained by God actually hand creating them and having Adam name them, you are anti-science.
okay, can we come back to that?
Are you going to quote Romans 1:20 at us?
No. What I'm going
Okay,
to say is
then
this: what I see in the Bible is that before the flood, so we're talking about a decent amount of time, but a relatively short amount of scripture. So Genesis 1 to 6. I think back then God made Himself way more available and obvious to mankind, but the result was disastrous. A vast majority of people decided to hate Him,
okay,
and
so
so
how does that affect Matt and Paul today? If
And
God
also,
wants
yes,
to have
it,
an
sorry.
It affects
what,
you
what,
guys because what I see is that God realized being obvious does not work relationally.
do you think that the omnipotent God didn't know that before he created?
No, I think this idea of exhaustive foreknowledge is completely illogical and unreasonable.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, I can respect that
That's fair.
if you yeah.
Yeah, I
So
was
you
going to
think
ask
that
that same question about whether or not God knew it, but do you think, like, let's say you dated a few people and it worked out poorly. Do you think that's a reason to stop dating?
No.
Then if God reveals himself and it goes badly, even for most people, do you think that's a reason for God to stop interacting? Because if his goal is to reach the people who are reachable, then he shouldn't hide.
Yeah, so I think what he does is takes a different approach now with mankind. And I
How do
think
you
that
demonstrate
when
this different
people,
approach?
yeah.
How do you demonstrate what is this
Um,
different approach and how do you demonstrate that it actually happens? Because it sounds like you're just coming up with yet another, like the last caller, ad hoc explanation for why things don't work the way some of us would expect.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it ad hoc. It might be anecdotal, but a good example is when you're kids, you don't see and understand what your parents are doing for you and how much they care for you and how much they love you. You don't
But
see
you're
that till
aware that
later on in life.
but you're aware that you have parents.
Yeah, that's true. Very
So
true.
so
I
I like according to the caller, you wanted to talk to me about my God test. So I just want to get to it here. So
yeah.
would you acknowledge that in order for any person to choose to have a relationship with another entity, that a prerequisite is that they believe that entity exists?
Absolutely.
Is
Okay.
it also a
So
prerequisite that there be bidirectional communication?
Yes.
Okay.
okay.
Yes.
So all divine hiddenness is saying is I need to believe before I can possibly choose to have consent. So if God
Mhm.
wants to have a relationship with me, he needs to provide me and me only, whatever it looks like for me. He needs to, if he wants to have a relationship with me, he needs to provide me with sufficient evidence to believe, or whatever it looks like. I need to be convinced that he exists before I can even make the choice. And so my divine
Mhm.
hiddenness argument is that I cannot possibly even make the choice right now to have a relationship with a God, because God has not sufficiently demonstrated himself to me, Paul, sitting in this chair right now, regardless of how he demonstrated himself to demons or Satan or angels or Noah or Moses or Peter. Like, none of that is relevant to whether me, Paul, sitting in this chair, can make an informed choice to have a relationship with God. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but I would say this, that I think if theists end up being right, God exists, and one day you pass away and you meet God, I don't think it will be a valid excuse from you that you didn't know he existed, because what I think would happen at that point is he would point things out to you that you had no good explanation for
So you
and
Wow.
should
so
have considered God.
will you think either that either I'm not smart enough or can't figure it out, or but do you ultimately, I think you're going Romans 120 on me. You want to say that I'm suppressing the truth, essentially?
I want to say that there are things that you have no good explanation for, but you're unwilling for whatever reason to allow God to be a possible
But
explanation for.
God made my brain
No,
this way, right?
no. And that's not true, but
Sorry, what did you say? God made what?
Well, God made my brain this way, right? Like, God could have made my brain less skeptical.
I don't know about that. I think God gave us a will, but we are, we're shaped by so many things throughout
But
our life.
okay, so are you saying that I do know that God exists and I'm lying about it?
Absolutely not. I'm not saying that.
So my
I'm saying
question
there
still
are things.
stands. My
Yeah.
Fine. I'm cool with the fact that I could go to the afterlife and, like, oh, and Jesus is there, and I'm like, oh darn, I guess I interpreted that evidence wrong. I did the best I could, and I interpreted
Mhm.
it wrong. Shoot, I'm wrong. But it still means that I lived my life without being able to have uh, informed an informed choice. Right? That's what divine hiddenness is. If God wants to have a relationship with me, he can give me some kind of assurance. But I
Yeah,
will
and
have gone to
yeah.
Judgment Day. I will have gone to Judgment Day a non-resistant, non-believer, and I'll stand there and go, "Oh, well, yeah, you had some evidence, and it got me. Oh, the fine tuning. I thought that was like a 25% reasonable, but it wasn't 100. Like, none of the reasons you're going to tell me, and maybe God has all these great reasons for doing it. All I can do is, as Paul in this chair, say that I cannot even make the choice. And you're trying to tell me that I can?
Yeah, I do think God is doing things in your life and actually everyone's lives, but they just don't see it right now. And so I think the atheist
Will
position
I
is
see it?
not as,
Will I see it before I die? Am I
Would these be the
guaranteed to?
invisible things of his nature in Romans 1:20 that Paul's now called out several times, saying you would say, and you said you wouldn't?
no, no, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is I don't think the atheistic position is as safe and sound as you think it is.
Hang on,
The
hang
reality is
on,
a
hang on,
relationship with God. Yeah,
hang
go ahead.
on,
Yeah, go ahead.
hang on. Nobody said anything about the atheist position being safe and sound. My atheist position is I am not convinced that a God exists. You have already accused me once in this call, which got me to interrupt Paul, of essentially ruling out God as a possible explanation for things I can't explain. And that's simply not
Mhm.
true. If I
Can I
don't
give
have
you
an
an
explanation for it, if somebody presents an explanation, I will accept it. But God isn't a candidate explanation until somebody can demonstrate that it should be. Are you able to demonstrate an observed phenomenon and explain why God should be considered a candidate explanation for that phenomenon without a logical fallacy?
I think I can, yes.
Cool, let's do that. You'll be the first in 20 years.
Okay, cool. It's abiogenesis. So I'm going to present that abiogenesis, which is life from non-life, is completely unscientific, has never been
Nope,
observed, can't be
nope,
repeated, can't be tested.
nope,
Yes,
nope, 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 nope,
yes.
nope, nope. Listen, no, listen. You are now asserting that life from non-life is non-scientific and has never been observed. That is already false. However, let me just grant you abiogenesis has no scientific explanation. How does that confirm that God should be considered a candidate explanation for abiogenesis?
hmm Yeah, that's a great question. And
I know
I
it's
think
the
the
question I
answer
asked at
is,
the start.
yeah, I think the answer is that if we have a situation which is seemingly impossible, that it does make logical sense to consider a deity in
Nope,
that situation.
no. See, you've at some point, everything seemed to be impossible. At some point, we did not have naturalistic explanations for things. And in every single situation where we have confirmed an explanation, 100% of them have turned out to be natural, and none of them have turned out to be supernatural or God. Just because we don't have an explanation does not mean that you are warranted in inventing a candidate explanation of supernatural orders. You would have to be able to demonstrate that the supernatural is real, that it does in fact interact with reality, and that it can do the thing you're talking about. And you haven't done that, and neither has anybody else in the history of the world, because supernatural causation is not testable or demonstrable. But you definitely don't get to go running to supernatural explanations just because today in 2025, you don't currently have a scientific explanation for stuff. There are plenty of things that we don't have scientific explanations for. There are things that we didn't used to have scientific explanations for. And all of them that we've found explanations for have turned out to be not fucking magic and not fucking supernatural. It is simply a
Mhm.
fallacy, a God of the gaps fallacy that you're trying to do. And I specifically put a restriction on this. Could you do it without a fallacy?
Just suggesting that it might end up
I
being a
don't care.
mistake.
Will, I don't care what you think might be anything. I wanted an
Mhm.
argument that was not fallacious to show why God is a candidate explanation. And your argument is we don't have a better explanation that's scientific.
Mhm. Yeah, all I'm suggesting is that if I'm right and God exists, and you one day meet him after death, he might.
I'm going to mute you because now you're entering monumental fucking dishonest territory. We were having a decent discussion about the nature of evidence, about unexplained things, and whether or not there's a candidate explanation. And now you are doing the disgusting, cowardly thing of saying, if I'm right, someday you're going to meet God and you're going to find out, and he's going to tell you that all the evidence was there and you were just too stubborn to do so because he has given you over and you made you reprobate in your mind, and you just, this is ridiculous. Do you have a way to demonstrate without fallacies and without red herring distractions about the future why God is a candidate explanation for abiogenesis? Yes or no?
I would say yes.
Cool. Present it.
Okay. If we don't have an explanation for something, all I'm saying is that God should be one of the possibilities that we're open to.
No, sir. Will, I just fucking asked you if you had a way to demonstrate why God should be a candidate explanation. And the words that came out of your mouth were that if we don't have an explanation, I think God should be a candidate. That's not a reason why. That's just your opinion, bro. Make a fucking case.
Okay, let me try it this way. Let me try it this way.
Let me try it this way. Absolute, full stop, last chance for you to do the thing, because I've already given you two other opportunities. How can you demonstrate why God should be considered a candidate explanation for abiogenesis? Anything else, I'm hanging up.
Because it might be true, and I don't want to hold a position that would guarantee I'm wrong if God ends up existing.
No. So first of all, you said your reason for it being a candidate explanation is because it might be true. That is not true. It is not necessarily the case that a God might exist or that a God might be the right answer. That's the very thing you're trying to do. And you are saying you don't want to exclude the possibility just in case it's true. Well, guess what? Neither Paul nor myself have excluded that possibility. We just don't get to include it in the list of candidates until such time as you demonstrate that there is a God and it should be a candidate, and not just come in spouting your opinion of what you think should count. Are we clear?
We're clear. I just don't.
Goodbye. I don't care if you think, ooh, it might be true. You don't know that. You don't know that it might be true. You have to demonstrate that it might in fact be true. You have to demonstrate there's some likelihood that there is a God. You have to demonstrate that this exists and can be a candidate explanation for why. It might be true that abiogenesis was something the fairies did. I don't think that that's been, I don't think it might be true. I don't think there's been any demonstration that it's possible. But your godling and universe farting pixies have the exact same demonstrable likelihood, which is 0. And until they rise above 0 demonstrable likelihood, you don't get to consider them a candidate explanation, and you don't get to pretend that you can dismiss universe farting pixies while hanging on to a God just because a number of other people have bought into the same fallacious line of reasoning. Thanks.
It's also possible. It's possible there will be a judgment day, and I will stand there and say, "Oh, okay, the Christian God is real, and I'm going to be in hell now, and that kind of sucks." But and I will also say, "Oh, I guess I was too incredulous," or I could imagine ways. Oh, I could have been more credulous during my life. Sure, but that doesn't solve divine hiddenness, right? Like saying you're saying my problem for divine hiddenness is you're too incredulous, and I'm like,
Yeah.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that I'm actively. I still don't. That doesn't solve my problem in my chair that I don't actively know that there is a God to choose to have a relationship with. So you need to read up on divine hiddenness a little bit more, I think, for that. So
this is something happens all the time. And has for the entire time I've been doing this, and for long before. It's not like arguments for God and excuses started with me. I'm just pretty old. This issue of, hey, what are you going to do, Matt? What are you going to do when you get to heaven and find out you were wrong? Well, I'm going to stand there, and if God knows my mind the way you propose, God already knows that I am intellectually honest, that I am open to being proven that I'm wrong, and that I was actively seeking and evaluating evidence based on the best available standards to avoid fallacious thinking, to avoid gullibility. And when his advocates down here made cases for him, those cases were indistinguishable from whatever God I'm talking to and the 50,000 other potential gods that are out there. And that God standing there, supposedly judging me, took no action to in any way demonstrate his existence to me. It is not possible for a God to be moral and remotely intelligent and capable of understanding human minds to then be justified in punishing me for using the brain that he gave me and failing to find a claim convincing despite sincere effort. If I'm putting in all the effort and God's putting in none and then decides to judge me, fuck him. Nothing I can do about it. God can squash me like a bug, but it doesn't make him moral. It doesn't make him good. And it doesn't mean that any of you who have cowered in fear from possibly being squashed by a God have any intellectual rigor or justification for your beliefs. You're just afraid, which is why you said, I don't want to exclude it because it might be true. How many other gods and how many other potential explanations did you exclude that might also be true based on the same criteria? It is fear, and it is obvious fear. And I'm beyond it. I am more moral than any god's ever been presented to this show. And I'm more intelligent than any god that has ever been presented to me on any of the shows. And I'm not even that fucking remarkable. So God needs to do better. So
Theists
Jacob
should
is
pray.
a friend of Paul's. I'm sorry.
Oh, I
There's
was
that
just saying
delay.
theists should pray before they call in, and
Yeah,
so,
they
so
truly
that
should.
God can tell them what to say that would convince us. Anyway, yes, let's get to our call.